The first time I stepped into that bank, all I wanted was $100 to fix a flat tire and buy some groceries. I wasn't dressed to impress, just an old denim jacket, work boots, and hands that still smelled faintly of clay from my studio. But the moment she saw me, my sister, the branch manager, tilted her head, narrowed her eyes, and said loud enough for every teller to hear, "We don't serve beggars here." People stared. Some smirked. One guard actually reached for the phone like I was some kind of threat. And my sister? She just folded her arms and smiled like she'd won something, like reducing me to dust in front of strangers made her feel taller. That moment, it didn't just bruise me, it reopened wounds I thought had long scarred over. Wounds from a childhood where I was always the afterthought, the leftover, the disappointment who got dirt instead of diamonds. But what no one in that lobby knew, not the clients clutching their designer purses, not the interns whispering behind desks, was that I didn't come to beg. I came to see how far someone would fall when they finally realized who they tried to step on. So when I asked to withdraw $5 billion just minutes later, using the full authority of the Magnolia Trust, something happened no one expected. The bank froze, the lights flickered, and my sister, she fell to her knees in front of everyone, and that's where this story really begins. Hi, I'm Elwyn Thorne, and if you've ever been underestimated, discarded, or made to feel invisible by the very people who were supposed to stand by you, then this story might feel a little like your own. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or tell me where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes, even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. And if my voice speaks to something in your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe. Not just for me, but for every woman out there reclaiming her power quietly, one story at a time. Thank you. And now, here's my story. Charleston's November had a quiet kind of melancholy to it. The red brick sidewalks were slick with fallen leaves, the air tinged with salt and something softer, something old. I pulled my coat tighter as I stepped through the oak-framed glass doors of the Palmetto Trust Bank, the scent of jasmine striking me first. Polished wood high ceilings and genteel silence. This place wasn't made for people like me. I wore my usual jeans frayed at the knees and my thrifted coat with one button missing. But around my neck was the only thing I allowed myself to treasure, a deep emerald scarf I'd bought from a vintage stall the day I closed my first property deal. It wasn't expensive, but it reminded me I was still building something no one saw. Today, I wasn't here for myself. But Marlo, my elderly neighbor, had asked me for help she needed. I had $100 for groceries. She didn't trust online payments, didn't own a card, and her pension check hadn't arrived. I told her I'd get the cash for her. It was the least I could do. I approached the teller with my ID and bank card. She looked at it, then back at me. Something shifted in her eyes. She whispered to a colleague. A pause. Then the sound of heels clicked across the marble floor. Sarah, my sister. Her hair was pinned, her lipstick perfect, her blouse crisp. She looked every inch the Southern banking royalty she believed she was. I hadn't seen her in months. Not since she laughed at me in front of our mother for wearing off-brand shoes. Elwyn, she called loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. You still have an account here? I stood still. She smiled like she'd won something. You know the rules. We don't serve beggars. The words were scalpel sharp. A woman holding a Coach purse glanced over her shoulder. A man in a navy blazer raised a brow. Someone behind me coughed awkwardly. I didn't flinch. My hands tightened around the edge of the counter. I didn't say a word. I didn't give her the pleasure. I turned and walked out as the cold air hit my face. The sky was overcast. Still, when the wind lifted my scarf slightly, the green caught the light. I held my head up. They'd always tried to press me down. 15 years old, pitching my dream of turning decaying Georgia land into sustainable housing at dinner. My father laughed so hard he spilled his wine. You should learn to boil an egg before you build an empire, he had scoffed. Sarah had once leaned in close and told me almost kindly, if you're lucky, Elle, maybe you'll marry someone with property. They all thought I'd amount to nothing. But none of them knew about Magnolia Trust. None of them knew I had quietly built a $5 billion real estate trust with my partner Amos, a forensic accountant with a hatred for generational greed. Over years, we had bought back pieces of land under shell companies, structured private funds, and positioned assets carefully. Magnolia Trust had holdings across the Southeast, and a significant chunk of its money sat right under Sarah's nose at Palmetto Trust Bank. She managed it, but she didn't control it. I did. Back in my apartment walls, thin heating unreliable, I opened the wall safe behind my bookshelf. Inside were the original registration documents of Magnolia Trust bearer shares, encrypted account data, and Amos's power of attorney filings. All legally sound. All quietly pot. I picked up my phone and texted Amos. Prepare the pull. All $5 billion. This wasn't just money. This was a declaration. I was no longer their pawn. I was the one flipping the board. The next morning, silence was my only visitor. No missed calls, no messages from Mom, nothing from Sarah. Not even Lila, my eldest sister, who always played diplomatic peacemaker when it suited her. I lay still, eyes on the ceiling, thinking, if I vanished today, would they even notice? Or worse, would they feel relieved? I remembered being 18, sitting with my grandfather, Henry Thorne, in the sunroom of this very apartment before it became mine, when I was just borrowing time and space from him. He told me he was drafting a land trust, one that would divide the Georgia properties evenly among his 3 granddaughters. It's time you girls took the land forward, he had said, eyes soft, voice firm. A month after he passed, I was told politely and with rehearsed sorrow that I wouldn't be receiving anything. Not due to oversight, they said, but because I lacked the necessary financial literacy, that I wasn't ready. My mother remained silent when I begged her to ask why. Sarah and Lila just smiled like it hurt them too. Maybe it's for the best, Lila had offered. You don't want to deal with all that legal mess. But something always felt off. The documents they showed me felt too clean, too altered. Last year, I began comparing them. I accessed copies of the original will filings, estate plans, and side letters Henry had shared with trusted attorneys. Then, I pulled out an old notebook he once let me write in, inside his authentic signature, the one on the estate documents they gave me. Not the same. The pen stroke was too tight, the ink color subtly wrong. Someone had doctored it, and I was going to find out who. Boston had given me more than an education. It gave me Amos, a financial ethics specialist with a disdain for corporate cover-ups. He'd once turned down Lila's offer to consult for one of her shell firms. He knew, and he wanted justice. Together, we built Magnolia Trust. We acquired the property's repackaged assets, layered protections. I used a legally registered alternate entity to serve as the named beneficiary, keeping myself out of all visible documentation. It was risky. It was surgical. But it worked. Until now. Amos called the night after the bank incident. You need to see this, he said, voice tight. Palmetto Trust, under Sarah's authority, held nearly $1.8 billion in trust account placements. She didn't know I owned them. But if she got curious, if she suspected, it could end badly. With one internal maneuver, she could freeze accounts under risk assessment protocols. Worse, she could redirect them under the guise of emergency liquidity transfers. I couldn't allow that. So, I decided to go public. Not to the world. Just to her. I told Amos to prepare the full extraction documents, ownership proofs, authenticated seals. We drafted the formal demand for fund release, every clause legally bulletproof. And included were forensic signatures, audit trails, and board resolutions that, if challenged, would trigger external federal review. I printed everything, slid it into a black leather case. Standing before my mirror, I wrapped the emerald scarf, carefully smoothing the folds like armor. The reflection looked back not like a victim, but something else. Last time, it was $100, I whispered. This time, it's $5 billion, and you will kneel. I turned, picked up the case, and stepped into the cold Charleston air, one step closer to the reckoning they never saw coming. A week had passed since the bank lobby humiliation, and yet the sting still lingered in my chest like cold air trapped under my skin. I returned to Palmetto Trust Bank on a Thursday morning, dressed not in armor, but in quiet assertion black blazer, neatly pressed pants, and the same leather case that held every truth they tried to erase. The emerald scarf was still there, carefully knotted at my neck. I wanted Sarah to see it again. The lobby hadn't changed. Still polished, still proud. But the atmosphere had shifted. Some of the same tellers were working, and I saw the recognition bloom in their eyes as I walked past. No one said my name this time. No one laughed. A few looked away. I approached the reception desk and gave my name, my legal name, and title this time. Elwyn Thorne. I'm here on behalf of Magnolia Trust. I have a scheduled request with your financial director. The receptionist froze, glanced at the computer, then did a double take. Of course, she said quickly. Please follow me. I was escorted upstairs into a private suite where the bank met with its highest profile clients. Soft jazz played in the background. Leather chairs, marble coasters. A man in his 50s entered, gray suit, gray smile. He sat across from me with a polite stiffness. What can I help you with today regarding Magnolia Trust? He asked. I'm here to initiate a full withdrawal, I said. All holdings, $5 billion. His face didn't change at first. Then slowly his lips parted as if the air had turned sour. I'll need a moment, he said, rising from his seat with rehearsed calm. It took 5 minutes. 5 minutes for the floor below to begin reacting. A low alert triggered in their system an internal lock protocol. Tellers quietly halted transactions. Clients were escorted from desks. The receptionist who had led me up earlier passed the glass doors with eyes wide and uncertain. Then she entered. Sarah. Her heels stopped just outside the door before she pushed in. Her posture was rigid, but her face said everything. Disbelief, then fear, then recognition. Elwyn, she said, slowly. Your Magnolia Trust. I didn't answer. I simply opened the case and laid the documents out on the table. Original trust agreements, notarized authorizations, asset schedules, Amos's legal seals. She took a step forward, but didn't touch them. I have a child, she whispered. I can't lose this job. I met her eyes. You didn't lose it today, I said calmly. You lost it the day you called me a beggar in front of your staff. The senior director returned. He reviewed the papers with increasingly shaky hands, then nodded. Your request is valid. We will begin the liquidation and internal audit immediately. Outside the glass doors, the bank's entryway sealed itself into lockdown mode. The branch was officially in audit freeze. Sarah staggered back into the room like someone had pulled the floor from under her. Please, she said. Al, please don't do this. If this gets out my name, my license, my career, I lose everything. In front of her colleagues, in front of her staff, she dropped to her knees. I have nothing left, she said. Please. I didn't speak. Not at first. I looked at her, and I remembered the cold in her voice when she mocked me. I remembered how she'd made sure I felt small in front of strangers. I'm not doing this to punish you, I said finally. I'm doing this because you never once asked me what I needed. You chose cruelty. I chose silence. And now, I'm choosing to leave. I gathered my documents, turned, and walked out of the room. Behind me, the great Palmetto Trust Bank, built to uphold legacy and status, was frozen, and a woman who once controlled it all sat trembling on the floor beneath a golden chandelier. 2 nights later, I found myself standing outside Garnet's, a restaurant where families didn't argue, they negotiated, where every table was reserved weeks in advance, and the wine list was more political than pleasurable. I'd been invited by Margaret, my mother, who claimed this was to be a family dinner, a chance to find common ground, an attempt at healing. Inside, the lighting was warm, the chandeliers tasteful, and the conversation rehearsed. Sarah sat quietly pale and clearly worn. She didn't wear makeup, and her eyes had the dull sheen of someone still bracing for the next wave. Lila greeted me with a smile, too wide to be sincere. "Elle," she said, pulling out my chair. "You've had quite a week." Margaret nodded from the head of the table, hands folded around her water glass. Ned, Lila's husband, the ever-smiling real estate opportunist, gave me a salesman's grin. "We're so proud of you," Lila continued. "Magnolia Trust. Impressive. I mean, you always did love land and maps." "I'm glad we're finally working with someone who actually understands this stuff," Ned added. "We've got some big projects in northern Georgia. You'd be a perfect partner." I sat down slowly. "Is that what this dinner is? A proposal?" Lila laughed, and it rang like glass. "Don't be cynical. It's a celebration." I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim folder. I laid it flat on the linen tablecloth. "This," I said evenly, "is the original land trust from Henry Thorne. The one he intended for all three of us, until someone tampered with it." I opened the folder and revealed the notarized documents. Real signatures, real dates. The letter from Henry to his attorney confirming his intention for equal division, and the forensic report confirming alterations on the version I'd been handed years ago. The table shifted. Sarah looked away. Lila's hand froze mid-reach. Ned started fiddling with his napkin. "This isn't a threat," I said. "It's a correction." Lila leaned back, trying to smile. "Elle, why dig this up now? We're in such a good place to collaborate." I reached into my coat pocket and retrieved a sealed envelope. "This is from Mom," I said. Margaret blinked, startled. "It's your handwriting," I added. "You sent it after the incident at the bank. Want me to read it aloud?" She said nothing. I broke the seal and read I knew about the adjustments. "I knew Lila and Sarah removed your name from the trust. I let them. I thought they knew better. But watching you rise, watching you walk out of that bank with dignity, I realize I failed you. I won't ask for forgiveness, only that you don't become like us." I folded the letter and placed it gently on my empty plate. "You've all built a fortress out of money and appearances," I said. "And now that I own part of the foundation, you want to welcome me in." Lila's smile vanished. "You've always liked playing the victim, haven't you?" I looked at her, at Ned, at Margaret. "No one at this table wanted me until I had something you could use." I stood. Family isn't who you're born to. It's who doesn't push you out when you're inconvenient. I walked out of the restaurant without finishing my drink. Outside, the air was sharp and cleansing. A young server followed behind me with my coat. He handed it over, then hesitated. "I saw what you did at the bank," he said quietly. "Good for you." I nodded and smiled softly, pulling my coat tight. Behind me, the restaurant lights glowed like a stage. Inside, the actors kept performing, but I'd exited the script, and soon I would return to the house where this legacy began. Only this time, I would be the one holding the key. The Thorne estate stood as it always had, white columns, wrought iron gates, the faint scent of magnolia and money woven into its bricks. A week had passed since the dinner at Garnet's. I hadn't planned to return here, but some truths demand a setting, as grand as the lies they aim to destroy. Inside, voices buzzed over champagne and catered hors d'oeuvres. The great hall had been dressed for spectacle gold trim over old portraits chandeliers burning brighter than necessary. Lila stood at the front, a microphone in one hand, gesturing gracefully toward a projection of the Oregon property. She was delivering a speech about the Thorne legacy, speaking of stewardship, unity, and vision. She spoke our grandfather's name with reverence, as if she hadn't tried to erase the very intentions he left behind. I walked in without invitation, the soft hum of my heels on marble the only warning. Heads turned. I wore a black dress, simple and unadorned, the emerald scarf tied tight at my neck like a reminder. In my left hand was a black folder, not thick, but heavy with weight no one else yet understood. Lila paused mid-sentence. I'd like to make a withdrawal, I said. Not of money, of truth. I moved to the front, connecting a flash drive to the laptop. The projection shifted. First, two documents side by side. One held the original signature of Henry Thorne on the Georgia Land Trust. The other, the version they'd given me years ago. The discrepancy was obvious. Stroke pressure, ink pattern alignment. Below the images were metadata logs pulled from the archived file timestamps, IP origins evidence of tampering. Gasps moved through the room like wind rustling leaves. Next emails. Between Lila and her private attorney, sent 6 weeks after Henry's funeral. One line stood out. If we alter the trust structure now, Elwyn won't have grounds to challenge. She has no resources. A voice cracked from the crowd, Aunt Marianne, 80 years old, one of the few who still remembered Henry's sense of fairness. Lila, tell me you didn't. Before she could answer, I advanced the slide. Let's talk about Oregon. I pulled printed documents from the folder and laid them across the table. Copies of transfer deeds, offshore wire, logs, internal emails. The Oregon estate, valued at nearly 8 figures, had been quietly transferred into the hands of a nonprofit created by Ned Lila's husband just months before. On paper, it looked like a donation. In practice, it had been funneled to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Ned tried to speak. This must be some kind of accounting miscommunication. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled up travel records, event logs, and donor reports, all matching the timeline. Then came the third slide. A screenshot of the fund named after my grandfather, the Henry Thorne Educational Grant for Women in Business, supposed to help first-generation college women. Instead, the funds were used to purchase a luxury condo in Atlanta. Receipts, wire logs. A text from Lila to Margaret. Don't worry, Elle's not smart enough to follow the paper trail. I turned off the projector. Around the room, murmurs had shifted to conversations. A few investors excused themselves. Someone dropped a glass. Lila stood frozen. Margaret turned red. Then, Lila broke. You think you're better than me? She shouted. You think you earned any of this? Grandpa just felt sorry for you. You're nothing but a pity project he left behind. Her voice shook with fury. You always play the wounded bird, don't you? Flying in from nowhere and acting like you built everything. I looked her in the eye. Then I played the recording. Margaret's voice came first. Let her go. She's not entitled to any of it. Lila, you're right. She was always the mistake. We don't owe her anything. The room fell into dead silence. I placed the black folder on the stone buffet table, then pulled out one final envelope, my mother's handwriting, the one she'd sent weeks ago, but never thought I'd use. I'm rescinding my prior approval of all asset transfers made without full disclosure to Elwyn, she had written. I failed her once. I won't again. I looked up. This house has 2 doors, I said. Today, I'm walking out the one none of you ever built for me. And I did. The echo of my footsteps followed me down the hall louder than any applause Lila ever received. It was raining when I returned home that night. The Charleston streets glistened under street lamps, and the air smelled like wet leaves and electricity. I found a white envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a photo of me, at age 7, standing in front of a crooked drawing of our family home, the words "Family Forever" written in shaky purple crayon. Taped to the back was a handwritten note. You destroyed everything we built. The chill I felt didn't come from the weather. The next morning, Charleston Chronicle ran a feature, a 2-page spread. Margaret Thorne, photographed against our ancestral estate, looked solemn and poised. I never realized my youngest daughter was capable of such manipulation, the article quoted. She forged documents, she exploited our family, and she broke the trust of everyone who ever loved her. Margaret told the press I had falsified legal records to steal from my sisters. Within 48 hours, 3 major donors to my nonprofit withdrew support. One sent a polite email. Another didn't reply at all. A third sent me a death threat. 2 days later, I was served. Lila and Sarah had hired Wentworth and Grace, one of the most aggressive law firms in the state. The suit alleged I had fabricated ownership claims, engaged in financial coercion, and manipulated charitable assets for personal gain. A hearing was scheduled within 72 hours. I couldn't afford a stall tactic. I needed a lawyer fast. Amos connected me with a young attorney named Clara. She'd interned at the SEC, worked pro bono for survivors of financial fraud. She was barely 30. I didn't need someone polished. I needed someone who still believed in justice. The courtroom was small and wood-paneled, packed tighter than usual with reporters. Lila arrived in a gray dress and a practiced expression. Sarah wept through her opening statement, claiming I had turned the family against each other for money. The moment that cut deepest came from someone I'd once trusted, Mrs. Marlowe. They had convinced her to testify. She walked in, hunched and pale, holding a crumpled handkerchief. Elowen used to talk about how much power she had, she said. She told me she could shut down banks if she wanted to. It wasn't true. I stared at her, understanding now why she hadn't returned my calls. That night, I sat in my apartment alone, a cup of untouched tea beside me, flipping through Henry's old leather journal. One page I had skipped over many times before now stopped me. Elowen, he had written in ink, nearly faded, your heart is too big for them, and they will try to squeeze it dry. Don't let them. I ran my fingers across the words, then reached up and slowly unwrapped the emerald scarf from around my neck. I set it gently on the table. It looked smaller than usual. Or maybe I just felt smaller now. I whispered to no one. Have I become what they claimed I was? Someone dangerous? Someone they had to stop? That question was still echoing in my mind when the phone rang. Mr. Langston. His voice came through firm and steady, even with the storm cracking in the background. I have everything he said. Original copies, signed, dated, and sealed. Henry left them with me years ago. I held on to them in case this ever happened. My fingers curled into the edge of the journal. Meet me tomorrow, he said. We're going to set the record straight. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel cornered. I wasn't saved. But I wasn't finished. The morning after Mr. Langston's call was crisp, the harbor air thick with salt and the kind of quiet that comes before clarity. I met him in his modest office, tucked above a shuttered law firm, facing the Charleston docks. The man looked smaller than I remembered from my childhood, stooped slightly, eyes tired. But his voice still held the gravity of someone who had stood beside my grandfather when others had turned away. He handed me a wooden box, polished and aged like something passed down through generations. Inside were the documents I thought I'd never see. In their unaltered form, the original Georgia Land Trust papers, handwritten clauses, notarized forms, all bearing Henry Thorne's signature in ink that hadn't faded. On top lay a letter, in Henry's unmistakable hand. If Margaret or anyone else removes Elowen from what is rightfully hers, give her these. She is the only one who understands the value, not just the money. I held the letter in both hands, as if it might disappear, and for the first time in months, I felt not alone, but backed. That afternoon, I received an email from someone named Abigail Myers, an ex-employee from Palmetto Trust Bank. She had heard about the court case and reached out with a single line, I have something you'll need. We met that evening at a park bench near Marion Square. Abigail, no older than 30, trembled slightly as she handed me a thumb drive. "There's audio," she said, "from the day your sister humiliated you, and from what she told us afterward when she thought you'd left." Back home, I played the clip. Sarah's voice crackled through the speakers. "That girl, if she had any real money, she wouldn't come in here looking like a thrift store lost and found. She's nobody." Time-stamped. Recorded on a company-issued device. Admissible. Abigail also testified to watching Sarah override internal fund controls, shifting management permissions from trust admin to regional authority, a breach of protocol. That document was now in my possession too. Meanwhile, Amos sent me a new report. Funds from the Women's Future Foundation had been rerouted to an offshore account in Switzerland under the name M. Sinclair. Sinclair had been Lila's pseudonym at university. She'd once bragged it made her feel continental. We traced the funds, through shell companies, through falsified expense reports, right into a luxury property listed under an alias. The court agreed to reopen the hearing. Inside the courtroom, sunlight spilled across polished wood, and for the first time, the defense table felt less lonely. Clara, my attorney, stood taller than usual. Mr. Langston took the stand first. He presented the original documents, verified handwriting, the private letter from Henry. Then came Abigail. She spoke softly but firmly, playing the audio clip to a stunned silence. She described the toxic work environment, the fear instilled by Sarah. Finally, Clara introduced Amos's financial audit. The paper trail was undeniable. Even the judge raised his eyebrows when the Swiss account matched funds from the charitable organization. After a pause, the judge leaned forward, cleared his throat, and spoke, "All charges against Ms. Elowyn Thorne are dismissed in full." Then, looking at Lila and Sarah, he added, "This court recommends immediate referral to federal financial crimes investigators regarding potential fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of fiduciary power." Outside the courthouse, microphones waited. I didn't stop for interviews. I didn't smile. I simply walked forward, the emerald scarf around my neck once more. It didn't feel like armor anymore. It felt like a flag. A journalist shouted, "Do you have anything to say to your family?" "Elowyn?" I turned slightly. "The truth speaks for itself," I said. "I have nothing more to add." The days after the ruling felt weightless, as if gravity had lifted just enough for me to breathe. I returned to my office. The small nonprofit I had once built from little more than Henry's name and my own stubborn faith was still standing. Barely, but standing. Donors, who had quietly stepped back, began returning. Some wrote apologetic emails. Others simply donated again, silent acknowledgments of a truth they now believed. I restructured the education fund. This time, it wasn't run through family names or faceless committees. I called it Henry's Heart, a scholarship for girls dismissed, silenced, or deemed unworthy. Girls like me. One afternoon, Margaret appeared at my door. She carried a weathered wooden box. Inside were the fragments of a childhood long, buried a cloth rabbit missing one ear, our old family cookbook, with my notes scrawled in the margins, and the tiny dollhouse we had built together when I was 8. We sat for a long time. "I picked the wrong daughter," she said, her voice frayed. Not because she lacked anything, but because I was afraid. I didn't cry. I didn't lash out. I simply said, "If you want a relationship now, you'll have to wait," the way I did. Later that week, I received a letter from Sarah. No return address. Neat handwriting. Inside, an apology. I didn't open it. But I didn't throw it away either. It sat in a drawer beside old photos and unopened birthday cards. Maybe someday I'd read it. But not yet. Lila didn't send anything. Her assets were frozen. Investigations moved forward. Word had it she relocated somewhere near the mountains, out of reach of most social circles. Ned filed for separation and took their daughter with him. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt clear. The house I bought wasn't grand. A small cottage by the Ashley River, where morning light spilled through gauzy curtains and the air smelled like salt and earth. Around the porch, I planted white jasmine, fragrant and soft, no longer tied to the memory of a bank's lobby, but reborn as something alive. One morning, while I stirred tea, a small bird landed on the railing outside. It didn't flinch. It simply stood as if it belonged there. Maybe it did. I found Henry's old savings book in a drawer. Taped to the first page was a folded note in his blocky script. For the youngest, because she has the biggest heart. I sat at my writing desk and began a letter, not to Margaret or Lila or the press, but to Henry. I did it, Grandpa. I didn't let them crush it. I didn't take everything. I only took back what was mine and what others after me will need. Months passed. Margaret began sending letters, updates about old neighbors, little stories. I read them, folded them, tucked them into a wooden box. I hadn't replied. But I hadn't locked the box either. On my 26th birthday, I hosted a small gathering, just a few girls from the scholarship program. We drank lemonade on the porch and watched the river move like time itself. One of the girls, maybe 14 sharp eyes and quiet, asked me, "Are you ever scared your family will come back?" I looked at her, smiled faintly. "I've learned how to leave the door open," I said, "and how to choose who gets to walk through it." The wind carried the scent of jasmine, and the past no longer held the only key. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who once called us family. But healing doesn't always mean returning. It means rising without revenge, walking away with your dignity, and building something they never thought you could. If this story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment, hit like, and don't forget to subscribe. Your presence here means more than you know.